Thank you so much. Thank you for that nice introduction. I'd like to start off with the notion that this is me, and let's work our way to the next one. How about this? Well, you know, if you'll notice, there is me. My publisher says I have to have an avatar. So there's my avatar. Now, you may think with this photographer friend of ours that I'm one of the Kardashians, but I'm not. The fact of the matter is that my grandson says I look like Papa Smurf, so let's not get too big on our britches in this particular regard. I recognize something, that age does not always bring wisdom. Sometimes it comes alone, so that's me. So I teach public speaking at Stanford. I taught your daughter. She was a lovely student to have. Bruce Bean is here, teaches the class with me. So I thought, well, maybe I should talk about the normalization of insanity, such as thinking about Donald Trump as a public speaker. But he does all the things we say not to do. He rambles, he appeals to base values, he simplifies complexity, he talks in jargon, he sells feelings, he engages in hell-on attacks, and he's incredibly successful. So it's my constitutional law teaching I want to talk about here today. The normalization of legal insanity. So if you're having a reaction right now, a visceral reaction to Trump 2.0, let me say something. My wife, Karen, has a solution. She bans any image or mention of Donald Trump in our household. But here's the problem. It's this. The problem is, by doing that, you miss the whale. My wife, Karen, says that I'm nosy. At least that's what she writes in her diary. So the fact of the matter is, what's happening? We are becoming numb, not just in this crowd, but across the country, to Donald Trump. There are chaotic orders, bizarre tweets, race travel bans, sexism, scapegoating, braggadocio. You might recall that the war in Russia and Ukraine was going to end on the first day. So what's happened to us? If you've lived long enough, you realize that we've normalized things that would ordinarily, a single act would disqualify someone running for president. Nobody cares anymore. It's page 11, and the next day nobody remembers. So let's take a look. 34 felony convictions. Ho-hum. But of course, the first 100 days will be days of greatness. And the first 100 days are going to have executive orders. And certainly across the board, if a president provided pardons to people, felons, there might be a discussion. How about crazy tariffs? No, big deal. How about, are we getting up in arms? We have ICE raids in Los Angeles. Or we have of course, downsizing of federal workers. We have things that are going on this way. You've seen these things in this particular regard. These are the things that affect America. So we have the downsizing of the World Health Organization, news organizations, higher education such as Harvard, law firms. And we're going to defund a lot of things. We're going to defund FEMA. We're going to defund Voice of America. We're going to defund NPR. And guess what, everyone? We're not up in arms. The man sells Bibles and watches. He apparently is going to get a $200 million airplane for free. And he makes $1 billion on cryptocurrency. You might recall the uproar for Hillary Clinton when she got $100,000 for Whitewater. Now, this does remind me of that great phrase, and you politicians should know it, from Senator Alan Simpson, who quipped in Washington, the phrase quid pro quo means, in Latin, holy crap, what a coincidence. And may I say, the most bizarre thing I've noticed in the last couple of weeks is a tweet. The President of the United States tweeted that the former president had been executed and was a clone. That has not hit the media again. The fact of the matter is that the only thing that hits the media are caricatures of the two people who are at war with each other. So President Trump, we take for granted, engages in a certain braggadocio. He said, and I quote, exaggerations went up by 1,000,000% last year. And then, of course, we have the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And we run the risk, if we have this insanity, we run the risk that there will be things hidden in that bill. Take a look at section 70302. That's in the new bill. It just came out of committee yesterday. It's going to limit the power of federal courts to issue injunctions against government officials. Take a look at Section 43201. Big in our state. That's going to impose a 10-year ban on enforcement of all state and local laws that regulate artificial intelligence, such as during voting. So we have a challenge, may I suggest, as the last speaker. And not a cat video challenge. It's a challenge that we are normalizing things that we could otherwise miss. Now, when I was in high school, my teacher assigned Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. You'll recall it was a story about the bombing of Dresden during World War II. But what Vonnegut does is every time someone dies in the book, he says, so it goes. So by the time you get to page 100, so it goes becomes so it goes. It is normalized. It's normalized. Well, maybe it's this simple. Maybe what we need to do is distinguish between ripcords and loose threads. Let's figure out why. This is my favorite cartoon. The parachutist goes to the gates of heaven, right? And you can see, no, that's a loose thread, not your ripcord. Knowing the difference between ripcords and loose threads. So what's happening? What's happening is that we believe in our system of checks and balances. The Congress is not providing a check or a balance. Ask Mike Johnson whether there's a check or a balance. Now, I get an opportunity each year to go to the Supreme Court and give a little speech on subject matter jurisdiction, an exciting subject matter jurisdiction. And I promise the justices and others that we'll get 3 cases off the docket. But is the Supreme Court acting as a check and balance? I'm not sure that it is. So there's been a sea change. I teach constitutional law and have for decades at what used to be called Hastings, now UC Law San Francisco. I was so proud for all those years to teach United States versus Nixon. You'll recall the case. That was a case where even though President Nixon had appointed 3 members of the Supreme Court, the court unanimously, 8-0 with one justice not being able to appoint, unanimously ordered the President of the United States to produce the tapes. You know what's really amazing? He produced the tapes. Has there been a sea change? I wonder if there's been a sea change. The United States Supreme Court in the last year has rendered a decision that says a long way from the Nixon case. Nixon seems so benign. A long way from the steel seizure case where the Supreme Court said President Truman couldn't seize the steel mills, to a holding from the Supreme Court that the President of the United States is immune from criminal prosecution and extends to all official acts, anything that's part of his core constitutional duties, pardons, vetoes, commanding the military, executing the laws, no check, no balance. But it was more than that. The Supreme Court said that it pertains to all of his official acts or things that are related to his official acts or testimony. I have taught for many years a lot of tough, maybe bad decisions of the Supreme Court. Can we agree? Dred Scott. Can we agree that Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal? Can we agree that Korematsu, which upheld the right to intern the Japanese during the war, were the failure of imagination? I'm not sure that this decision from the Supreme Court may not make that list. So what happens? We are beginning to normalize the unthinkable. No persons above the law? That was a principle that we never even questioned. You know, I teach the Pentagon Papers case and have for years. The Pentagon Papers case, as you might recall, is a case where the United States Supreme Court had to determine whether the New York Times and the Washington Post could be restrained previously before publication of news articles obtained from the Pentagon Papers that were taken by Daniel Ellsberg. The Supreme Court voted 6-3 to hold that prior restraints, while sometimes constitutional, in this case the government had not proved the hearing. So the fact of the matter is that Supreme Court said something. Well, you know what? I want to tell you something. The lawyer who argued that case to the Supreme Court, Alexander Bickel for the New York Times, was asked a few months later, and he was asked, you know, did you win? Did you really win? And he said, and I quote, "The law is never so certain as when you don't need it. Those freedoms which are neither challenged nor defined are the most secure. Suddenly a prior restraint might issue, but not this case. Can we say the same for the concept of the rule of law? Will anybody in this room be surprised if the President of the United States defies a court order in the next 6 months? I don't think so. So here's the challenge. The challenge is the challenge of what I call inattention. We don't have to agree or disagree with the president, we just have to pay attention. Normalized insanity You might think that's an oxymoron, like organized mess, or jumbo shrimp, or crash landing, seriously funny, random order, or my favorite, vanilla fudge. May I suggest to all of you that although my family loves the subject of irony, this is ironic. When I teach irony in my speech class, I always use this slide. Nothing is ever written in stone. You know, let's try something out. Everyone ready? Let's try ourselves out at this hour about the concept of inattention. Here's what I'd like you all to do for me. What I'd like you to do is do a little math with me. Double each card. So count an ace is 11, that's 22. In your mind, double each card. You're all A students in school. You want to win this test, so double each card. 11 times 2 is 22, 2 times 2 is 4, etc. All right? Can somebody shout out what the answer is? What's the answer? We're doubling the 11. 22 plus 4 plus 6 plus 8 plus 10. Okay, you're all flunking, but that's okay. But guess what? You were all so fixated on the math. Guess what? Did you notice that the 4 of hearts was black? You were so focused on the math and getting it wrong that, in fact, you missed that the 4 of hearts on the original slide was not there. So our challenge is attention. The solution is simple. Next time we vote, remember this admonition. Never hire an electrician with scorched eyebrows. Attention, awareness, resistance. Naomi Klein has a new book out. It's a good read. It's called No Is Not Enough. You cannot make a fire with dead embers. You have to be, whether you're protesting or you're supporting the president or attacking the president, you must be like a fire hydrant. You put out the big fires and you stand up to the big dogs. My next slide is maybe the most important. Challenge people with more power than you and support people with less power than you. If you apply that principle to whatever political philosophy you hold, whether you agree or disagree, because at the end of this speech I'm going to be audited. But the fact of the matter is that you do it. So now let me end with this if I could. Let me end with this. Several years ago, the amazing poet laureate of Ireland, Seamus Heaney, he was near the end of his life. He was in a hospital in Dublin. Keeping watch because he was on the verge of dying was his wife Marie and his son Michael. They had been, as so many as have in that situation, sitting and waiting. And the doctor said, "You've been here for days. Go get some lunch. Go get some lunch." Seamus Heaney, who knew he was going to die, once they left the room, he pulled out his cell phone. On his cell phone, he typed out a text. You know what the text said? In Latin, he said, "Noli timere." He sent the text to his wife, Marie, and then he died. His last words of his life were the Latin phrase, "Be not afraid." Noli timere. You know, that is, I suspect, what the theme of my entire presentation is. Pay attention, be aware of the powers and the absence of power, and remember that there's a street sign you have to pay attention to, whether you're protesting or not. That street sign is, "This is possible." Thank you.